So continuing on our discussion on personality and going back to trait theory, certain types of traits, let's move on to Raymond Cattell. We have talked about Raymond Cattell and we talked about crystallized and fluid intelligence. This is moving a little bit differently. He used factor analysis to help narrow down personality traits. Factor analysis is basically using like mathematic formulas to kind of narrow things down. What you do is give everything like a number and then kind of just basically work mathematically to figure out and kind of narrow things down as far as what a personality trait would be. And he divided personality traits into two different categories, something called a surface trait and one called a source trait. A surface trait is clusters of highly related behaviors. Examples of this would be if somebody's like happy-go-lucky, somebody's fearful, somebody's timid, those type of things. He would call those surface traits, things that we see and that others consist of. So that's why we say highly related behaviors. They kind of work together, and as well as other people have them. Source traits would be underlying causes of these behaviors. Examples of different source traits would be like their temperament or their motivation or their ability. And he actually ended up having, I think it was like over 20 different source traits that would be part of the, that he originally started with, and then he got it down to, I believe it was 16. And he used this in a personality trait test called the 16PF, Personality Factor Questionnaire. And it measures an individual's personality in terms of 16 important source traits that he identified as being present at some level in all individuals. So what he would do is, as he's going through this type of test, he would be able to figure out what type of personality this individual has. Now, psychologists use this 16PF today to evaluate individuals and to compare their scores with other larger groups, including different age ranges. But what it really does is kind of shows us a little bit, and again, narrows down people's personality. You guys have to think of it like this. Each of these guys almost comes up with their own personality test, and we will eventually, I'm going to send you a link to a personality test, have you guys take it. I want to know what your type of personality is. But when you take these personality tests, it just kind of depends on what type of questions they ask, and that's kind of what these guys are doing. Paul Costa and Robert McCrae, they used, again, factor analysis to pare down the number of traits by clustering together traits that were highly correlated with one another, like happy and joyful. Those are very close. Fearful and timid, those would also be close. And so when he did this, he studied and he revealed what is known as the Big Five. And I would definitely know what the Big Five stands for. The Big Five stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. This is also known as ocean, and you can see why. When he studied the Big Five, what he wanted to do was he wanted to find out how open the person was. Are they inquiring? Are they independent? Are they curious? Or are they the opposite of all of those? Are they conscientious? Are they dependable? Are they self-controlled? Do they think of others? That type of thing. Are they extroverted? Obviously, the opposite of that would be introverted. And he would rank all these people on these things. Agreeableness, meaning do they conform with people? Are they likable, or do they kind of go against the grain? Are they neurotic, meaning are they highly excitable, or are they super, super anxious? And what he did is, and he studied these Big Five, he kind of came up with how a person's personality traits deal with these five things, and then you could categorize the person within all of that. Next, you have the person, situation, controversy. One of the questions that people have is whether or not traits, like from the person or the situation, are more reliable in terms of predicting behavior. And so basically what you're trying to see is this. Is it the person or is it the situation that determines a person's behavior? Because you might be able to say, well, the person's behavior is super, super consistent with this. But is the situation the thing that's dominating that, or is it the person themselves? Is it the person's personality traits? There's going to be certain times that a teacher would freak out about something, and then other times they just won't. So is that the situation, or is that the person's personality, where you can't figure out if that person themselves is, super neurotic, or, if their behavior is inconsistent? So that's kind of what they're talking about there. That's not super important. Roman numeral 8, personality assessment techniques. Objective tests. These are also called self-report inventories. And these are basically questionnaires that ask individuals to indicate if specific statements about behaviors, symptoms, emotions, or thoughts relate to them personally. Usually done using true or false, multiple choice type questions. And what it does is these tests are useful because they are easy to score and can be given easily to large groups of individuals. And so what ends up happening is as they take these type of tests, um, it's a little bit easier for you to just quickly get this done so that scientists and psychologists can figure stuff out. And they would ask you a question like, if someone took a tool out of your garage without asking, would you be angry? Would you be curious? Would you be upset? Those type of things. Like, would you not care? And they would ask you to rank yourself. And the most frequently used objective personality test is called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or the MMPI-2. 2 meaning it's the second version of this. There are over 500 questions that an individual has to answer about themselves. The answer is true, false, or cannot say. They would be like, if you had dinner plans for Friday and at the last second they got changed, would you care? Or it would basically say, would you care? True, yes, I would care. False, no, not that big of a deal, or you really cannot say. Those type of questions. And usually used by clinical psychologists and psychiatrists to evaluate the mental health of clients. 500 questions, though, that's a lot. Some careers have given this test to check on the mental stability of the person they are hiring, meaning if the person cannot complete the test itself, then maybe they don't want to hire them themselves. Another example of the questions that would be on there is, I do not tire quickly. Like, I do not get tired quickly. True, false, or cannot say. Or, I am sure I am being talked about. True, false, or don't care, or cannot answer. Those type of questions. And so those things, kind of do help. Help the psychologists understand the person a little bit more. They use this stuff for careers in medicine, for law enforcement, military, just to try to figure out the mental stability of a person. Another one that they actually have is one called the California Personality Inventory, or the CPI. That's another one. But that one kind of deals with interpersonal skills, self-control. You don't necessarily need to know that. One of the effects that they have is something called the Barnum effect. That is a potential problem that they have with objective personality tests. And this is the tendency, the Barnum effect is the tendency individuals have to agree with descriptions of themselves that are generally positive, but also unclear or ambiguous. People may be likely to believe any personality description of this sort, such as a horoscope, regardless of its validity. And so what's kind of weird is the Barnum effect basically says that if things are positive about you, you'll probably believe it. But if they're unclear and ambiguous, you might as well. Now you might be like, what's a horoscope? Those are like the things that say, like, if you were born, between June 24th, which is my birthday, so I expect all of you guys to send me a message some way, shape, or form, or gifts. That'd be great too. But one other thing that I would have you guys think of is you go there and it says if you were born from June 24th to July 24th, your horoscope or your prediction based on the stars is this. You will meet a stranger today and they will be kind to you. And so all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay. And then maybe you meet somebody at the bank or at a gas station and they're kind to you and you're like, wow, that really came true. Why did you believe that? Because it's kind of unclear and ambiguous. You don't really know. And so people may be likely to believe any personality description of this sort just because it seems kind of like a positive thing or it seems kind of unclear, ambiguous. They call that the Barnum effect. The halo effect is the tendency to generalize a favorable impression to unrelated dimensions of the subject's personality. Now, this one's kind of weird because what you're saying is if you kind of feel that a teacher is nice to you, then you might say that they're nice to everybody, okay? And you might say that they are generally a nice person just because they are nice to you. What you're doing is you're taking that halo of one thing that you see and you're making it grow bigger around them. And it's your tendency to generalize a favorable impression to unrelated dimensions of the subject's personality. So you would say in sports, this person is kind. They are a good teammate, whatever that could be. Projective tests, the participant is given a vague or ambiguous stimuli and asked to respond to it, often with a story. It's usually associated with psychoanalytic and psychodynamic methods. Unlike an objective questionnaire, the projective test is unstructured, and participants are presented with open-ended questions. Perhaps the most famous one is the Rorschach ink blot test. The participant is presented with cards that have ink blots of ink on them. The participants are then asked to describe what they see. And so this is where somebody kind of looks at this and says, "Oh man, I see this, and this is a lion attacking a gazelle." And the interpretation of these results is supposed to reveal how subject solves problems, and also, as well as their intellectual level and their emotional stability. And so that's kind of an interesting one because why they call it a projective test is you are coming up with stuff yourselves, and they're projecting what you're thinking onto another object. It's almost like we talked about projection earlier with a self or defense mechanism. It's kind of like that. In your book, they do have Rorschach ink blots that you could kind of show you, but again, it's very unstructured and it's open-ended because I could look at an ink blot and see a lion attacking a gazelle, and somebody else could look at an ink blot and say, "I see Cheez-Its in a huge bowl at my house," whatever that could be. And so it is kind of different, and it's difficult to understand what each person sees. And the last thing we have is the thematic apperception test by Henry Murray. A series of cards with ambiguous pictures on it, and the participants are to create a story. We've already actually talked about this earlier this year because it's used to measure achievement and motivation. That we talked about that in the motivation section. And basically what it is it's two people like on a boat. You see an old man and a son on a boat. And if you remember, I think that was an analogy I used. And then you have to make up a story. And some people might be like an old man and a son fishing. And some people are like, "Oh, it was a beautiful day," and a grandfather who's up in years and just really wants to spend time with the grandson. And again, these are kind of projective tests because again, you're just projecting what you think. There's no necessarily factual information there. There's not really a wrong answer. It's just whatever you believe. And the issue with projective tests is it is subject to experimenter bias, meaning if you're the person who's giving the experiment, whatever you decide to interpret what the person's saying is pretty much what you think it comes up with. So if I'm a psychologist that deals with these type of tests, I might come up with something from a story that Wyatt gives me, and then the psychologist down the hall might come up with a completely different story from Wyatt's story, or a completely different analysis from Wyatt's story. And then these are usually considered low in reliability and validity because, again, it's based on the experimenter's bias. All right, that is chapter 15. We will be having a test and a quiz on the stuff. I will explain that stuff on your Google Classroom page, but please make sure that you guys are at least paying somewhat attention, and you can use your notes and you can use your book. I will explain what type of quizzes and tests these will be. They'll be a little bit different than what we have used earlier this year. So if you guys have any questions, by all means, let me know.